How to run a restaurant? That is the small question we are asking today, which has some very big, complicated answers. Welcome to Explain Like I'm 10 with me, Meghnad, where we ask small questions which has some big answers. This episode is a bit hatke. We usually don't do this, but this episode is right up my alley for 3 reasons. One, I'm a foodie. Guys, I'm a foodie. Second, I love to cook. And third, potentially in some other life, I want to open a restaurant. And who better to ask this question than Gauri Devidayal, who is basically just right here all the time.
I know. Instead of running a restaurant.
Yes. No, but Gauri, you have multiple restaurants. How many do you have now?
So now with 3 dine-in restaurants, we have an event venue, and then we have 4 delivery brands.
4 delivery brands also.
Yeah.
Right? Fancy.
By the way, that third thing that you, in some lifetime, might want to open a restaurant might just change after this conversation. But yeah.
You never know.
You never
Maybe
know.
you will convince me otherwise. So let's see. And our union leader of spectators today is Abbas Momin. We call him union leader of spectators because he had no idea you were coming and what the topic is. So he just sits.
You didn't know what the topic
I seriously
is.
didn't
Yeah.
know.
Actually, the topic could have been podcasting. Honestly, given how much time I spend here.
But the point is that this is where Abbas will come in and he will annoy you and ask you questions because he has no preparation done. I have done much.
He's the
preparation.
real 10-year-old.
Yes, exactly. That's the whole point. Gauri also hosts a podcast on the IVM network called This Round Is On Me, and she also was a part of a podcast which I binged on called The Kolaba Cartel, and the first voice that you hear is you.
Yes.
In that podcast.
Yeah.
I recommend you listen to it, but now that Gauri tells me the restaurant in question for that podcast has closed down, but still some great insights there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so you have these many restaurants that you run, and my my getting in question would be, how do you do it?
I don't know. So, we actually are going to be... Our first restaurant is called The Table, and it's turning 12 next month. So, that's a pretty big milestone. And in restaurant years, that's probably like 100 years. Or it feels that way. I feel 100 years older since we opened it. And honestly, every day... Even now, I am learning and being challenged to the core.
Yeah.
So, I don't have all the answers, but I definitely have learned a few things along the way which have made the challenges different. They're not any fewer, they're just different. And, it's not... The challenges also come with expansion, right? So, we started with one restaurant back in 2011 when, the whole... dining and restaurant scene in Bombay was so different from what it is today. And then 5 years later, so we didn't do any expansion for 5 years, just focused on building this brand. And then 5 years later, we opened Mag Street Kitchen, which is the event space I mentioned earlier. Again, completely, ahead of its time in terms of, there not being a precedent for
It's
this.
a bit wild.
It
I
is
saw it.
a
Yeah.
little bit.
It's kind of wild. Yeah.
I mean, if this is any indication, my family was like, no one's coming there. So I don't know why you're doing this.
If you
But,
can quickly tell people what it's about because it's wild.
Sure. So Mag Street Kitchen is in a neighborhood that I can bet my bottom dollar you haven't been to ever before. It's an area called Darukhana or Ray Road. And it is a very industrial area. It's sort of, I guess, the closest landmark that people might have been to is either Baikala or the Ro-Ro ferry to go to Alibag. But it's basically in that harbour area of Bombay. And we just our family business was this stainless steel business many eons ago. All of that changed, but these warehouses remained. And we essentially took over one of them. Knew that it wasn't a viable location for a restaurant because it's not on your way to anything at all. But it was an amazing space, right? And in Bombay, that is the biggest problem, right? Location.
Space.
If you were listening to Kolaba Cartel, the very first episode is about location, right? And that was not exactly the best location for a restaurant. So we were like, okay, what do we do here? And we were at that point we were 3 years into the table, and there was this huge pressure to like open another another table somewhere in the city, which we didn't feel ready to do. But yeah, we kind of got the space, and we decided then maybe to create a back-end operation that would support the table in being able to do more things like maybe catering, etc. And then first of all, this was a complete dump, so it really needed to be spruced up from scratch. So this space actually took us 2 years to fit out, which is completely abnormal for an F&B project. But this was, like you said, something a little wild and offbeat. So what we ended up doing, and this, by the way, was the time when MasterChef was going crazy.
Right.
Everyone was obsessed with this on TV, MasterChef Australia, etc. And so we were like, one of the biggest challenges we face in the restaurant is, a great talent pool. And so we were like, why don't we create a space that's versatile enough to do cooking workshops, maybe have almost train our own talent pool or create our own talent pool for the restaurant, for other restaurants, etc. And so, just and take it up a notch from what was happening in culinary schools around. So the idea started with like, okay, we'll have a back-end support kitchen, but it can also kind of double up as a workshop space, etc. And then as we, we have this one very big problem, which is we don't do anything sort of cheap. And, when we started really looking into equipment and investing in the best equipment, we were like, what, this kitchen is turning out to look gorgeous. And so why not actually, also think of doing guest chef events, so having chefs from all over the world, all over the country coming and, doing their thing there, and basically becoming, I guess in some respects it was one of the first pop-up spaces, right? Which now is much more common and all over the city. But what's I think unique about this space is that it's 2,500 square feet, of which about 2,000 is just kitchen. So it's sort of the reverse of a restaurant, where the kitchen in a restaurant, which generally is in prime real estate, gets a tiny percentage of space, and all of it is utilized for dining and sitting for guests.
Like, I saw the pictures, and it does look great. I was a little confused when I first saw it, because I didn't know about it, to be honest. When I started researching for this, I found this place. So as you said, it's a pop-up kitchen, but okay, so that's a bit of a wild restaurant. I won't even call it restaurant. Maybe I will
it's
still
not
call
a restaurant.
It a restaurant. It's not, right? It's a concept, right? Where you are sort of getting these fancy ass chefs, and you are making them cook, or they will cook themselves, and you can watch them do it, right? And also, like, it's like a live sort of event.
Absolutely, it's a very immersive experience, because you have to walk into the space through the kitchen. You cannot enter. You cannot enter like you do a restaurant into the dining room. You enter into the kitchen and then go, eventually to your seat. And the idea was, again, this opened in 2016. The idea was everyone doesn't get to travel all over the world and like all over, and but there are people who like you foodies and want to experience all of that, and the idea was to bring it to Bombay, also completely for selfish reasons, because I wanted to eat all of this and at my doorstep.
And so do you have any restaurant ambitions?
Not really, but I've always been fascinated by the idea that a restaurant is essentially an experience, right? I mean, the food
100%.
is, of course, that's what you you associate restaurants with food. But, and I actually thought a lot about this in the last 2 years when we were not going anywhere. We were all stuck in our houses. The idea that places like movie theaters or restaurants where you're not really interacting with the people around, but you like the fact that there are other people around and you're sitting amongst them and you're doing something. So that has always fascinated me. My mother wanted to have a restaurant of her own, which she never could. And obviously, like all Indian sons and children, we would eat her food and say, "Arey kya khana banaya hai?"
Chalu matlab kal.
And then it's just one of those pipe dreams that you discuss and you make khayali pulavs out of it, and then it just never goes anywhere. Because obviously, once you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, it is very, very difficult to start an endeavor like a restaurant.
It's very interesting, this experience thing, restaurant. So in Nagpur, I come from Nagpur. Eating out for us was a very functional thing, right? There were like food trucks and thelawalas, like pav bhaji kha rahe, whatever. Never thought of it as an experience, right? It was like, khana acha hai, kha lo.
It's functional.
It's functional, right? I came to Delhi. Had very little money, like to begin with. Kuch nahi tha. Then one day, like I got my salary and whatever, and I was like, I'll go to a fancy restaurant. And back then, fancy was Burkos.
Of course. Yeah.
So I went to Burkos alone at like 4 in the afternoon because I was very conscious also that, and that is, I think, the first time I ordered, like, and I was experiencing like fanciness, according to me back then. And then, like, later, like, my MPs, I started working with MPs. They took me to, like, ITC and, like, these weird, very fancy restaurants, and it blew my mind. And that is experience sort of dining, right?
Yeah.
But just to go back and just start at the beginning, right? Like, why did you get into restauranting would be where I would start, because people have different motivations to start restaurants. Why did you start?
Because it's the normal thing for an accountant to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was coming to that. You were like you're a finance nerd and a tax person and basically spreadsheets. So
which is very important for a restaurant business, I'll have you know. So
Yes.
I'm not completely useless. So in complete honesty, it was my husband's, Jay's idea. And this is probably where you guys come in, where a lot of men go through this midlife crisis where they're like, now I want to open a restaurant.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Agreed.
You're nowhere near your midlife. Of course, Meghnad, you're a spring chicken, but it does happen. It's real.
Yeah.
I have lived it.
Yeah.
And I thought, because he was a techie who just moved back from California, didn't know the first thing about restaurants. So like I always say, it was the blind leading the lame in our case. But he started talking about doing this, and I kind of humored him for a bit, and I was like, okay, he'll get over it, he'll find something else to keep himself busy. And he like came back one day and he was like, I found the space, like I'm gonna sign it. And I was like, wait, at least I can help you read the document, make sure you're not just signing away all your wealth, and just help with those legal and financial formalities, which I do know a little bit about.
This was for the table.
So this was back in like 2009. And I have to say, like, it took him a year and a half to even close that space, as in find the right space and then finally close it, right? So from the time he'd started this idea of opening a restaurant to the time we actually had a signed lease was a year and a half. And most people give up a lot earlier in that process. Didn't happen here. And so, and then this was happening kind of in our living room. The whole process was brewing. And of course, I was there. So I kind of just, started giving my 2 cents. And, of course, Jay would kind of bounce things off me. And I was very much involved as a sort of bystander in the whole process. And then at some point, I found myself getting so involved that it was like having 2 full-time jobs, because I was still working, as in my tax avatar until then. And that's when I decided, I was like, look, this sounds interesting. What's the worst thing, right? I'll take a year off from my work, and if it works out, great. If it doesn't, I'll go back. I'd been doing my job for 9 years, so I felt like I was confident that I'd be able to get back in some way. So it was a very calculated risk I took, unlike Jay. And that's really honestly how it happened. We both love food, so neither of us are chefs, right? So of course, after finding the location, the next thing was like, okay, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And who's doing the cooking?
Right.
And it wasn't going to be either of us. So honestly, that whole period from the time we signed the lease to the day we opened the doors to the table was about 14 months, which is really not normal for a restaurant. And one of the big reasons is
But it was your first time, so I'm guessing it
yeah, but even for your first time, I mean, so we made a lot of mistakes along the way.
Sure.
And expensive ones, but the idea was to get it right? So, but the thing is, 14 months is not a good plan to have because you're paying rent, you're not earning anything.
Oh, that's true. Of course, yeah.
Big factor.
Big factor.
And so it's not the ideal way to do things, but I think the sort of effort we took with that process and the fact that it did take a little longer than usual has paid off eventually, but it's not something that we would like to do normally.
Right. So, what is the ideal time you think you would take if you wanted to open a restaurant?
I don't know. When she said 14 months, I was like, sounds about right.
I was also thinking that, right? So that's what I was like, नहीं ठीक है, बड़ा project बना रहे हैं तो time तो लगेगा, right? But then just like rent, I was like, sure.
And not like small rent.
Yeah, of course, big rent. Like it's in a good location, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, and generally that's the thing, right? Like coming back to that point of location, that you want to be on the high street. Ideally, it's your first place.
Of course.
I've grown up in South Bombay, so that's what we knew, and so I said, okay, this is, we do something in South Bombay. And and that's kind of how it happened. And of course, with that does come.
And now it's rent. Like one of like the world's top 50 or top 100 kuch to bhi mein tha,
not world's, but yes, I know we were pleasantly surprised ourselves this year to find ourselves in. Yeah. So it's called Asia's 50 best restaurants. It's a list of 100 restaurants.
Yes.
And so yes,
so you were in that. Yes. So basically from there now you're here. Yeah. So clearly you're doing something right. So I think those 14 months of pain were worth it, I'm guessing. Do you think it's worth it?
Now, yes.
Now you think it's
At the time, it was a painful process.
Yeah. So if you had to start a restaurant, what kind of restaurant would it be?
That's a tough question. Probably a fast food restaurant for me specifically.
You're not the customer, Abbas, in your own restaurant.
I actually beg to disagree.
Really?
So, and this is what I think worked for us, is that, and this is not gospel, but I think this is what worked for us, is that it was everything that we wanted if we went out to dine, including the food. So experience, of course, but in terms of the food as well, everything until today, when we do menu trials, if it's something that Jay and I don't see ourselves eating, it doesn't go on the menu, right? And we're not saying that we're the benchmark for great food or, we have the last word. But when it comes to our restaurant, it is that. Because
so I actually had two very basic questions regarding that. A, how do you decide what food you want to serve?
Yeah.
And secondly, and I know this is a very basic question, but how do you know your food is tasty enough to appeal to everybody?
So the first question is, of course, you may look for a gap in the market, right? So when, like I mentioned, Jay had just come back from California and he'd been living in San Francisco and really missed the food there. San Francisco is one of the greatest food cities in the world. And he was like, hey, I want to bring some of that back to Bombay. So firstly, and back in, like I said, 2009-10, the restaurant scene was not what it is today. So there was definitely a lot of room for, creativity. And so that was the simple inspiration for the menu. And so in fact, our first chef was from San Francisco. So, we felt like we needed to bring that.
You needed to import a person.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can't expect someone here to just be like, okay, I want that. Right. And you've never experienced that. And, it's not something that comes innately. And to your second question, which is that...
How do you know it's tasty enough? Because everybody's palate is different.
Well, exactly. Right. And so it's really important, which is why I go back to that point, that it's really important that it's something that you enjoy. And you will never, ever please everyone, right? Now, this is something I learned the hard way when we opened the restaurant, where if anyone said something negative, it would break my heart. I wouldn't sleep for nights. I would just be like, how can someone not like this? And what are we doing wrong? And then very soon after I realized, and it's not because, there were so many people not liking it, but very soon I realized that you cannot please everyone, right? So it needs to be personal to a large extent. And there will be, a tribe of like-minded people who enjoy that same, style of food. And that's what you have to believe in, right? And it's really important in our business that you don't keep changing your concept and tweaking it every time someone says, oh, why don't you add more of this, or why don't you make the dishes more spicy, or why don't you, and if you start catering to every single person out there, you'll never have a concept, because it'll just keep changing.
This is what I wanted to come to. So again, I'm relating this to my functional versus experience thing. So the restaurant we used to go to in my childhood had these gigantic menus, like 30-page menus with everything from Chinese to Italian to pasta to everything.
Don't say it with such disdain. No, I'll tell you why in a second.
I am a foodie now. I'm elite, so I can. Anyways, no. But what I'm trying to say is that so they had like these ton of things on the menu, and of course, like as kids, you'll be like, "हाँ मेरे को Chinese चाहिए," and then someone will be like, "मुझे pasta चाहिए." Mishmash of pav bhaji and Chinese and pasta, everything on the table, and everybody would be like, whatever. Later, I also realized that in Delhi, especially, which has great food everywhere, every restaurant is specialized. Right, I mean specialized in the sense they have their cuisine. They give you something like a 3-page menu, which they do well, right? One of my favorite restaurants right now is an Italian place really near my house. They literally have like a 1-page menu, and they keep like changing 1 or 2 items because the guy who is cooking also owns it, and he basically is an Italian, raised in Italy sort of a person. Makes amazing food, right? But it's so limited, but I still keep going there. So, like, I wanted to understand this logic, right? Where if you run a restaurant, which approach, I mean, you clearly picked the latter one, but is that giant menu one even workable?
Okay, so I had the same thought process when we were opening the table, where I said that, the one thing I will never do is have a multi-cuisine restaurant, right?
Yes.
Where you're like, because you can never be, you'll end up being a jack of all trades and a master of none. And, but I see why a lot of restaurants did that, right? Like they wanted to bring in the crowd no matter what. So they were like, we have something for everybody, come, right? With the table, we were very clear we wanted to be the polar opposite. We did not want a Bible for a menu. We, in fact, were one of the first restaurants to do a single-page menu.
Nice.
And even if it meant squashing everything on one page. No, but, we were very clear that we wanted a single page. And while the cuisine that what we now describe ourselves as, you can say it's globally inspired or it's cuisine agnostic. So it's actually very different from multi-cuisine. Cuisine agnostic basically means that you're not partial to any one cuisine. You take inspiration from all sorts of cuisines.
Sure.
And in our case, the food really, the menu is focused on the ingredient. So it's called an ingredient-driven menu. So it's like, for example, if you have like, I don't know, cauliflower, you will put a dish on the menu that brings out the best flavors of that cauliflower. Now, it could be that
Is that seasonal then?
It could be. I mean, we have a lot of things now which are available through the year. So it's not, it's not necessarily seasonal. But the point is that you're kind of free to use inspiration from wherever you want. But showcase the ingredient in the best possible way. So that and that's very much the philosophy of California, where they get incredible produce. And so that's always like, hey, let the vegetable do the talking, or let the, meat do the talking, etc. Right? So, so because that was the concept we were following, we stuck to a single page menu and not a multi-cuisine in the traditional sense restaurant. Fast forward 10 years or now whatever 10 years, a little over 10 years. So the restaurant that you were talking about, Misty, which is the inspiration for the Kulaba Cartel podcast, went on to close. It was a Southeast Asian restaurant, so Vietnamese, Burmese, a little bit of Thai, and we ran that restaurant for about 15 months. And then we took a decision to close it, right? And that's a whole separate conversation. But the point I'm making is that now, in place of it, we opened a cafe called Mac Street Cafe.
Yeah.
And Mac Street Cafe has Asian, Italian, and it has a bakery in there and pizzas.
Yeah.
So I'm currently eating my own words as I speak, but it works But the one thing we were very clear we would not put in there was Indian, right? So what we realized is that instead of being like complete snobs about this whole multi-cuisine approach, instead embrace the fact that people, and especially when you have like multi-generation people coming to dine together, so grandparents, parents, kids, they may not all want to eat the same thing.
Sure.
And as long as it's not, so the concept of the cafe is, we call it an all-day comfort diner, right? And if comfort is your philosophy, give them that, right? So that's the thought process. But the interesting thing is that, so a lot of the menu that was on the Misty menu, so the Southeast Asian food, so obviously when COVID happened, it switched to a delivery format because we had the menu and we were like, whatever we could do to make ends meet, right? So we switched into a delivery format and continued to offer that menu. That menu is now still part of Mac Street Cafe, right?
Okay.
And the most interesting thing is that while the restaurant wasn't a commercial success, and I put that down to people not necessarily loving those Southeast Asian flavors, when it's become part of a, for want of a better word, multi-cuisine restaurant, it's the highest selling, like in between all the different cuisines, it's the highest selling part of the menu. So what I realized, and I don't know if this is an Indian thing or it's, people just want choice. And then they will gravitate towards the things that, it's not like it's highlighted more or less, but they just don't want to be told this is all you're going to eat, and especially when you're doing something.
I agree.
Yeah, so it's a very like it's a psychological thing where you're like, I'll go there and decide, and there's something for the kid, there's something for my mother, father, whatever, and there's something for me. We don't have to decide right now and make that big important decision,
right?
And we'll just go there and figure it out.
Oh, that's
I think, in my opinion, it is an Indian thing. The idea of value for money is ingrained in us to a degree, where the more choices we have, the more in charge or more comfortable we feel. That, the bigger the platter we have to choose from. Maybe we'll choose the same thing again and again, but as long as we have those other choices, there is a sense of control, if that's the correct word, that comes with it.
I want to give you another analogy to this point. So, again, I'm going to say Indians and probably get like trolled for this. But we have this really bad habit of booking in 5 different restaurants.
Yes.
To have that choice.
I was about to come to that.
And then cancel 4 of them and pick one at the end, right? And it's the most annoying thing as a restaurateur. I'm like, you know what? I'll give you all of that choice in this place. You come here and then you don't have to do that.
Funnily enough, in Delhi, so there's this Select City mall, right? Which has this DLF. Like, there are 3 malls in one, which has just this very fancy common restaurant place that has opened up. It's called Commons. So there are like these very fancy restaurants with like not multi-cuisine, single cuisine. But I feel like that place works because this happens.
You just head to the mall.
You head to the mall and I know people who have done that. Like, they've booked like 3 places at the same time. But वहाँ पे जाके देखेंगे ना किधर जाना है. आजू बाजू में ही तो है. तो वहीं पे एक हाथ में चले जाएंगे.
Very, very bad people.
I have seen people do that. I don't do that personally, but I have seen people do that. And I mean, I get the logic of that also to a large extent, because I think even the restaurants their turnover is so fast now, because obviously people coming to the mall, going to this restaurant, that restaurant, इसमें जगह है तो उसमें जाते हैं, उसमें जगह है तो उसमें जाते हैं types. So I see that they are also like a little flexible with the table booking and everything, and I feel like they have something called dynamic tables now. Like some of the restaurants, especially.
So they'll take your reservation, but they're like, ये नहीं आएगा.
Yeah, I mean, there are like, I literally, this one person I was talking to, we were a little late, so they're like 15 minutes हो गया ना, रुके थे ना, तो नहीं हुआ. But then there was another table. If you would have booked that is a half an hour table. I'm like, how does that even work? That doesn't make. But I think people have found their systems around Indianness or like choice, I guess. We will take a quick break, right? Before we take a quick break, Abbas has to promote his show, which is on this feed.
Yes. So there's a show called Page 10, which is a current affairs show that I host, and we have a panel which each person on the panel brings a piece of news to the table for the week, something that happened in the week, and then we give our opinions on it and have a healthy conversation about it.
Yes. Yeah. So if you are someone who does not follow the news, which I think is most of South Bombay,
last time also when I was on the episode, you took a dig
I
at
may
South
not
Bombay.
come back after the break, and you'll know why.
ठीक है guys, it's fine. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying it's okay. We have something for you, which is like 1 hour may you get 4 stories, the most important stories of the week, told to you by basically noobs. So yeah, enjoy. I will see you after this break.
Hi, hello everyone. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by actor Gauri Devidayal. Gulshan talks about his switch from fashion designing to movies and his new movie Blur, all set to release on the 9th of December. On This Round Is On Me, Gauri interacts with Jaitirth Ahya, founder of the Experience Co, about creating a community of ever-going eclectic professionals. On Just a Filmy Game Show, it's a crossover episode with Has It Aged Well, as Urjita and I compete for the title of Biggest Bollywood Divana or Divani. On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet talks to Ehsas Channa and Shreyasi Sharma, the star and the creator of the hit Girlyappa show Girls Hostel. And on The Origin of Things, Deepak Gopalakrishnan narrates the origin of the private residence of a 19th century shipping magnate. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcasts.com. We have some exciting stuff for you. Follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you like our shows, spread the word. Tell your friends and don't forget to rate and review them wherever you're listening to them. You'll also find all our shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Kotak Privy League Program and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you for making this possible.
Hello and welcome back to Explain Like I'm 10, where we are asking the all-important question, how to run a restaurant, to Gauri Devidayal, who has had many restaurant experiences and adventures, and some of them have closed down, sadly. I want to go like a bit section by section now, right? If I have to start a restaurant, what is the first thing that I need to consider?
Why you're doing it.
Why I'm doing it. So that is the question you already answered, which is, yeah, sure, like you want to say you're a foodie and you want to also like make other people experience the kind of food you like and in a good way. And also, but on a larger scale, is food a good business to get into?
Can that be my driving force? I want to make a lot of money. Should I open a restaurant?
Yeah.
Okay, so in all seriousness, it's a very, very difficult business to make a lot of money in, but it depends on what format. So I don't want to generalize, right? I mean, you can be if you're in a scalable format, so what's called QSR or quick service restaurants, so like your McDonald's of the world.
Right.
If you can scale fast, that's probably where you'll be able to sort of rationalize costs faster and hopefully make money faster as well, right? Subject to having a great product, etc. But scale is not easy to do. Consistency is one of the key, fundamental pillars of the restaurant business. So unless you can master that, that scale is not gonna, do you any good, right? In our business, which is fine dining, we haven't scaled, right? There's only one table.
Yeah.
12 years later. So you do have to make it work, and how you do that is I think it's about being aware that it takes a long time. So you have to be in it for the long haul. You have to be willing to ride it out, because, and especially when you're introducing something new, right? So again, that point about finding a gap. If you're doing something which may be not currently available in the city, you might need to wait till people adopt, accept, if it's a matter of changing habits. So I'll give you an example in the case of the table. I mean, the cuisine was, again, something new. They were like, but is this Italian or is this continental? And I was like, it's nothing. Just come enjoy the food. That's it, right? Why do we have to bucket it into anything? the other thing that we did was that we had the single page menu and we put everything, we categorized things into small plates and large plates, because the whole idea was it's family style. It's not European where you're doing a tasting menu and things and, you order a bunch of things, share them. And they were like, oh, is this just a fancy word for appetizers and mains? And we were like, no, you can have a whole meal of small plates.
Right.
It's the size of the plate, not sort of the order in which you eat it. And just some things work in smaller quantities, some things work in bigger quantities. And that's kind of the thought process. We had a community table, or we have a community table, which by definition is a table where you might be sitting next to someone you don't know, right? Like at a bar. Same people who come to our restaurant, travel abroad, you sit next to a stranger in Bombay, you're like, no, I want my own private table.
Right.
That's what happened right in the beginning. And today, or not today, but like I would say about 6 to 9 months into the restaurant opening, the community table suddenly became the hottest spot from being like the worst spot to sit at in people's minds, right? So there was a lot of like change, shift that in approach, in dining habits in a way that we were slowly kind of prodding at. And it took time. I'll be honest, it took us 3 years to even break even.
Wow,
that's not healthy if you're doing this to maybe
Make
live
a
off
quick
the
buck.
business. Definitely not if you're trying to make a quick buck, and that's a bad idea for any business, frankly. But that's the thing that you have to be prepared for when you're going into something which is pure passion. You don't necessarily have the experience in it. It's not like we'd worked in restaurants and then decided to open our own. And that's also got its pros and cons, right? Because and I remember talking to AD Singh on my show about this, and I said, would you do it the way we did it, where we just plunged into it, or would you get experience, and what would your advice be to youngsters? And he always said, I would 100% not do it the way you did it, but get experience working in restaurants, get work experience before you decide to venture into it. So I think that you have to go into it with all eyes open and not look at the surface of it, which today, you'll see celebrity restaurateurs, celebrity chefs, and everyone's like, oh, it's such a glamorous business. It's like you're an Instagram, like, celebrity or influencer or whatever. And that's literally like 0.001% of what it is, And so I think some people think, I can do the same thing cheaper. I can do the same thing better. I'll just like pull their chef out, or I'll just hire that, I'll pay their chef more and just bring them on, and I'll do the same thing. It really doesn't work that way,
And there is an entire show that Gordon Ramsay made out of this. It's called Hell's Kitchen.
True.
And no, it's called Kitchen Nightmares, forgive me. Kitchen Nightmares, if you have seen it, it's this show where people like this, right, which is went into like start restaurants, and then it failed because they're like, isne kiya to main bhi karega na, and then like either their food is not good, their staff is ill behaved,
and then he sweeps in and like rescues them.
He sweeps in and like Jesus, and then he basically just fixes everything.
Pimp My Ride, but for restaurants.
I have no idea what that is, but I guess. But no, the one thing that I've learned many things from that show, right? And one of them that I've learned is what you just said is, so that was going to be my second question, right? Experience, right? So you had no experience. You and your husband had no experience.
I had a lot of experience in eating in a lot of different places. And I mean, it sounds funny, but that is actually what drove a lot of the decisions we made.
Sure.
I'll give you a small example. And, I say this all the time to even like restaurateurs today. One of the most annoying things is when you go to a restaurant and you're going through the wine list, you pour over it, pun not intended, for about 5 or 10 minutes. You finally select something, and then the server comes up to you and he's like, oh, sorry, that one's not available. That is the most frustrating experience, and it's the start of the meal, right? So we were very clear right in the beginning that we would reprint the menu in case even one label wasn't available.
Okay.
And that's probably not environmentally friendly, but hopefully that doesn't happen often enough to require it. But the point is that, like you said, right, the food and beverage is just a catalyst. The experience is what you're coming for, right? And there was this huge debate about it when COVID happened, and everyone was like, oh, people have just got used to delivery, like why will they come back to restaurants? And we were like, yeah, we're social animals. There's a whole different experience with coming to a restaurant which you cannot replicate at home.
Of course.
And that's what, and that whole experience comes from attention to detail, and honestly is driven by what we experience somewhere. It's not something that you just see in a book and it's like a checklist.
The weirdest thing happened to me just recently. Okay, so during the pandemic, there's this new Korean restaurant I found, which obviously delivery, right? I think they started right before the pandemic, and because poor things, they had to go delivery. Now they have amazing Korean food, right, in delivery. Now I'm eating that. Now, as the pandemic is over, like last month, we were like, Acha, we've never been there. Let's try and go there. We went there and we had the food and it was 10 times better. And we was like, I'm never ordering from here again. I'll come here and eat it, but I will never order from here anymore. And I think that changed a lot of things in my head also, because I was one of those people where I'm like, अरे ये तो घर पे लेके आ रहे हैं तो फिर मैं why would I even bother to step out? Like, it's so easy. I'll just sit in the comfort of my home and do it. But now I'm realizing that the experience is basically what always brings people to that place. Which brings me to my next question is, what does bring people back to your place? Like, is it the decor? Is it the kind of crowd that comes in there? Is it the location? What is, according to you, the list there?
And if I may add to that, how do you get the first wave of people in once everything is ready?
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, now there's marketing. I'm going to answer your question first in terms of the first wave, and then how do you kind of get that wave back in, right? I mean, of course, there's all forms of marketing. Back in 2011, there was no Instagram. I remember we went on Instagram in 2014. And of course, like suddenly there was this flurry of press and all of that when we opened. I had no idea, right, what to expect. The biggest way of getting people in, even today, with all the sort of digital tools in the world, is word of mouth.
Yes.
Nothing can beat that or match that. You can spend all the money you want on paid ads and, influencer, whatever, invites and all of that. If the word on the street is not in your favor, that's the end of the restaurant.
Gordon Ramsay school of wisdom. Again, all the restaurants that he reopens, they're like, oh, we will do like a billboard. It's like, no, we will go on the street and we will give samples to everyone and say like, see, restaurant, come, and then like organically he sort of grows like over a period of time.
I don't know if that's what I meant.
I know what you mean, but yeah.
So, I mean, that's the way to get people in the first time. And of course, there's curiosity when something new opens in the city, etc. We all kind of go and want to check it out once. Getting people back in, right? I always tell my team this. I'm like, hey, of course, the food and consistency, I mentioned that earlier. Consistency is key because the thing is that when you go home, so my sort of benchmark for a good restaurant is if I'm still thinking about the meal the next day. If I've forgotten what I ate, it's unlikely I'll go back, and that's me. But if I still remember even one thing or couple of things, or something that happened but the food at the end of the day, I will probably go back and give it a second visit.
And also you'll recommend it to other people.
True. Like I'll be like, hey, actually I did have, there were some things which were really good. And then as long as I'm not giving like a completely shitty review, like people will probably check it out, right? Like you won't write it off immediately. But what I always tell, and the thing is that what it does then is, whether it's your first time, second time, whatever, you've created a memory there, right? Which if you remember the next day, you still have a memory. And then what happens is that if it's a really good memory because you love the food, for example, you want to relive that, you want to recreate that, some point down the line.
Fascinating.
So when you do and you go back, it better be the same. Because that's what you've craved and you want to relive. And then if the food isn't consistent, you're going to be like, I'm not going back there.
Oh, that's like a nasty psychological
No,
trick. I mean,
it's
like,
basically the last experience that you've had will be the way you judge that restaurant. So
no,
even if
I say that in a positive way. Sorry, I use the word nasty, but like it's like my way of saying it. It's a great way to sort of think about it. Maybe just correct me if I'm wrong, right? So for example, I'm just immediately thinking of this restaurant which I went to and I had a good memory there. It's a Japanese restaurant. Went there with my partner, had a great time. And the thing I remember about that place very specifically was the staff. Like the staff was so nice. They like Japanese restaurant. They explained everything to us, but they recommended things and they were very nice about it and everything. And when we came out, overall it was a great experience, but that is the one thing that stuck in my head, that, I had a great time there. I didn't realize why till a long time later, because we went there like twice, thrice. Then I realized, hey, these guys are very friendly.
Yeah.
That's why probably we keep coming back.
So that actually, brings me to the next point, which is that the food is one part of it, right?
Yes.
That is something that at the end of the day, you are going there to experience the food. So you can't be like, that's all crap, but everything else is lovely and still expect to go back. It's probably unlikely to happen. There has to be, that plays a big part in that decision. But the second thing is, and this is what I keep telling my team, is that why should someone come to our restaurant again and again, right?
Yes.
We're not the only people doing burgers and pastas and whatever.
Yeah.
Yes, we do it our way, which someone might like or whatever, but there's a lot of restaurants doing it well, and so why should they come back to us? And my answer to them is that because people have to feel at home away from home.
Right.
So, and especially like in a city like Bombay, where people, may have cooks at home who cook great food, why do they still step out and possibly have that food or, different food in your restaurant? And why should they keep coming back, right? So it's that element of, that's where the service comes in. And of course, like making great recommendations and, how you speak, that whole experience, but also making you feel like they know you. You're not just a random person who walked in. I remember where you like to sit. I remember what kind of wine you like. And of course, it takes time for them to get to that level of familiarity with guests. But it is there. And that's what, people just come and they're like, they take care of everything. And that's the thing that we as human beings, and this is not restricted to Indians for once, but this is the thing that we as Indian, as humans kind of want. We want to feel comfortable when we're going somewhere. You don't like going somewhere where it's all stuffy and you can't like squeak and you can't talk loudly, and it's like if one thing falls and you're like the loudest person in the restaurant, like you want to feel. And that's why we say that even though we call ourselves a casual fine dining, in the sense that you're a fine dining when it comes to the food, but it's casual in that you can come in your shorts and chappals. Of course. There's no dress code. There's no like, fancy white tablecloths and this, that. It's like, be yourself, like feel comfortable when you come in. Like, this is, and that's the whole sort of, that's the philosophy that we try and keep, ingraining in people's minds, that people need to feel at home when they come there.
That's interesting. Do you have a favorite restaurant yahan pe?
The one that comes to my mind is Link's Pavilion, which is also in South Bombay.
Why do you like it?
Every time I've gone there, I've had a great meal. I don't know why, but I always feel like I tend to have good conversations with the people who I'm there with. And it's located in a part of Bombay which I love. So that's like...
Do you eat the same thing when you go there?
Not really, but I do have a favorite. I'm forgetting the exact name, but there's a noodle dish that I have there, which I've had multiple times, but that's not something I order every time.
But it's, there are restaurants that I go to, and while I'm in the business and should be adventurous and blah, 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 like the fact is I'm also a creature of habit when it comes to my eating habits on a regular basis. Of course, I'll try different things when I'm, say, traveling or whatever, but... It comes like, you crave something and then you go back and you think of you associate a place with a certain, and we've had this. So, you mentioned that like this restaurant, your neighborhood restaurant, which has a single page, and once one of two things keep changing all the time. We've had situations where we're a similar concept, like, the menu does change from what it was 12 years ago to today. There are some things that are still on the menu, but things do change. And then I'll get like these irate calls from guests saying that, why did you take that off the menu?
Right.
And obviously, like, it passes over, you know, after, like, within. But there's a lot of that happens, and it really comes down to that thing of, like, you know, till they make the habit of the next dish that they'll grow to love or whatever. It's really about that connection with the place from a food memory perspective, as well as being made to feel at home. And you can be made to feel at home in like a 5-star hotel restaurant as well.
Right.
So it's not about like, oh, it has to be like a chappal short kind of place.
So I have two favorite restaurants currently, right? One is a Korean place,
Okay.
not the delivery one. It's a separate one. That
There's
place,
more than one Korean place in Bombay.
Oh, so many. No, it's not in Bombay. It's in Delhi. And Delhi has. Okay, I'm not going to go there.
Better food?
I'm not going to go there. I'm not
That's
going to
okay.
go there.
Every Delhi person
This is
says.
the second break, after which I may not.
I'm sitting with a person who runs a restaurant here. I'm not going to offend her randomly. But what I'm trying to say is that there's this Korean place in Delhi. Started off with a very tiny ass place in a very shady ass mall, which is this Ansal Plaza. You might have heard horror stories from there. So that place has now become a little bigger. I've been going there for years. The one thing that they do is they do great Korean barbecue. Right, they bring this stove, they plonk it on your table, and then they make those bulgogis, and then they put it in like cabbage, and then they obviously give it to you. I mean, you have to make it yourself and you eat it, but it's like this shared meal experience, and I realize I like that. Sure, me and my partner have gone there a bunch of times, but we usually go there with people. Like whenever we want to go out with friends, new people are here, we take them there.
Yeah.
And that experience is, I think, that what sort of keeps bringing us back to that place. The second favorite restaurant I have, though, is a ramen place. Again, 3 things on the menu, but they do great variations of it. Though I think like you answered that question of sort of create an experience which keeps bringing people back, and also the marketing part. I want to ask you, how do you get the right people to make that experience? How did you find your chef? How did you find your staff? Was it a trial and error thing? How did you get through that part?
So, I mean, hopefully with a chef, you don't have the trial and error thing, because honestly, this city will give you one shot at it. Okay, so you don't have the luxury of trial and error. And I would say the same, obviously, for the front of house as well. But the fact is that there is a bit more trial and error that happens. I think the important thing is if you're clear about what the philosophy of the restaurant is and what the standards are for that restaurant, and you can effectively communicate it and have the buy-in of your team, whether it's the front of house or back of house, that's the way to gauge whether someone is likely to, have the same passion towards, and basically communicate what you're trying to build here to the guests. Because you cannot be a one-man show who goes around to every guest, giving that experience that you want. So you need people to do that, right? To almost sort of be the agents of that philosophy. So they have to buy into it. There's so much. I mean, of course, I do believe in training people who have the right attitude, and even if they don't have enough experience, but who have the right attitude, they can be taught. But at the end of the day, if someone doesn't believe in what you're doing, it will very quickly come out in the experience that they're giving to the diner, and they're obviously not meant. They're not the right fit. So it is, in that sense, a little bit of trial and error. Of course, when someone has certain pedigree of experience, that indicates, that they may or may not be the right fit. But when it comes to the chef, obviously, it's something that, you have to have tasted their food and
absolutely
connect with it.
So
and
poach
feel like
from other people, essentially. No, but how did you find your chef?
So like I said, he was. So we had a consultant from San Francisco.
Sure.
And he was only going to be with us for the first few months. So we were like, okay, but you're going to go back. So we need someone who will stay on long after, hopefully. And so he brought someone else that he knew who was up for an adventure to come to India and be here for a year to start with. And that's kind of how it happened. So
and now he's still there?
So he's still in India. He's still in Bombay, in fact. So he was with us for the first 7 years or so.
Oh, wow.
And then he moved on. And in fact, now he has his own restaurant. But then since then, we've had other chefs come in and, they kind of build on what you've created and bring their own kind of style to it. Not completely digressing, but, that's where, again, you realize who will be the right fit and bring them in based on tasting their food.
Right.
But that's sort of how it is. It's not, and it doesn't, it doesn't always work to just say, oh, I'll pluck someone out and put them into my
that I feel like is the biggest difficulty I see with starting a restaurant, right? Because especially if you are not the chef.
Yeah.
I mean, finding the right people to make the kind of food that you think will work, which you like to eat.
That's the thing, that people often think the restaurant business is about food and beverage, and of course it's also experience, but it's actually a people's business.
Absolutely.
And so people are key to that success of that business. It doesn't matter, you can have good food, but if you have a really bad service experience, you're probably not likely to come back. If you don't even get the good food, then even less likely. But it's really important to have the right people there, and it is a learning curve, and that's, I would say, till date, our number one challenge.
Yeah. And also repeat customers is what make the business, I'm guessing, right?
They do, but that's kind of a fallout of getting all the other things right.
Because I has happened to me a few times where I go to a few restaurants and I remember that, taste change ho gaya. Like, something has changed, and I asked them, and it's like, the chef changed. So then I know that, so the guy who made it earlier, which made something particularly well, is not there anymore. So that's still trying to make it work. I feel like that might be the biggest fear that
it is. And I mean, when so our chef who was there for the first 7 years, he in between went off on a sabbatical for a year. Well, not a sabbatical, but he took off to go back to New York. And I remember the first time, it's not a one-man show in the kitchen, right? So even when you're saying something like that, like there's a whole army there that's doing things day in and day out. And as long as you've got them all on the same page, as much as the same thing I was saying for the front of house, it hopefully is not dependent on one person, right? And but I remember that when he was going back, like, people were gonna, everyone was like, oh, the restaurant's gonna shut down. And we didn't know, we were like, we don't have a choice, we'll just keep doing our thing and hopefully it won't shut down, right? And it didn't, because the team they kept doing what they were doing and what they'd been trained so well to do. And then finally, when and then he'd come back, and then finally he moved on completely. And at that time, that fear was, that expectation was still there from the public. But in our minds, we were a lot more confident that, we know we've done this before, it's fine. And and then ever since then, right? But I would definitely say in the first few years, you always have this insecurity when you're not the chef yourself, that, is this am I so dependent on someone that my business depends entirely on this one person?
Exactly, yeah. And so like my family, my mom's side of the family, they have a chain of restaurants. It's called Vishnu Ji Ki Rasoi, Shreyas's side of the family. So they have this, which I've observed. So they went from catering to restaurants. One of my mamas is a chef, like, is a celebrity chef, so he does that. But what I was like, I've spent a lot of time in the restaurant and whatever. What I've noticed is that they have created a system.
Exactly. It's training.
It really is, yeah. So even if that person who is like the head chef or whoever makes that particular dish changes, the people who worked with that person know the system, so they'll just keep doing the same thing.
I mean, so it almost sounds robotic, but it's not. It's not as simple as that. You do, as a fundamental, like, as a foundational principle, yes, you do have to have those systems in place, but then you also have to have the people who'll follow them.
Yes.
Right? So I think that's where, again, that whole idea of having people who believe in the same thing you do and, believe in the standards that you want to set. If they do that, then they will make that effort to follow the system, because the system is there, but it has to be adhered to.
So when you talk about, say, finding the right people, what are the qualities you would look for then?
I don't know if I've got this sort of, down on a checklist. I think a lot of it now comes with just experience when you meet people and you can gauge if they're bullshitting you or they genuinely, feel a certain way about it, or they have an openness to learn. They have a bit of a humility to, learn from you, and they're keen and they're in it for the right reasons, So I'm more interested in their journey rather than their technical knowledge, because that's something that you can learn on the job. And you can't learn an attitude on the job. That's I know what you mean. But yeah, fair enough. I mean, it comes with instinct, like you know immediately whether this person will work out or not. Sure. So, any other questions? I have one final question.
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions actually.
Go on.
The first one is, like you said, if you have to assess, like you say, there's a gap in the market and you go for something that's not very common. How do you educate the people who are coming to eat at your place without making them feel like they're being lectured or being being shown how to do things?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think when it comes to food, no matter how much I might know the theory of it, if it doesn't taste good to me, it doesn't matter, and that's what it comes down to. So, and that when it comes to educating, because you're creating a new segment in a way, you have to be patient. It takes a really long time for people to get it, to take a liking to it, and it's a habit change you're creating, right? If you're used to going out and always ordering I don't know, aglio olio pasta or spaghetti or whatever when you go somewhere, and then today I'm like, that's not even on my menu, and I'm like, saying I have spaghetti or I have pastas on the menu, but that's nowhere near. You're pushing someone to try something new, and you have to be like, they may like it and they're not sure why, they're not sure, and I definitely don't believe in sort of preaching about, this has come from this place or that place, and, carried by so-and-so person and done 20 things too, and, I'm not trying to make you grateful for all the effort that's gone into it, or it has to taste good. Simple. Flavor is everything. And of course, if they're interested, you can always share more, but it should not be the premise for expecting someone to like your food.
Who decides the pricing on the menu?
The costing decides the pricing. I mean, it's as simple as that.
But the money factor of this whole thing was actually going to be my final question as well, which I think ties into that.
One last question.
But just on that point, because we were very clear from the beginning that we never wanted to compromise on ingredients. There's 10 types of truffle oil, for example, and there's quite a big range in pricing of truffle oil, just as an example of ingredient, or avocado, right? Something that people really love. We were very clear that we were not sort of hell-bent on an ideology of it has to be local if that product available locally is not as good as what it can be. Right? So if it's not the best version of the product, either don't use it or use the best version. So in our case, it was that we would use the best version, right? And that sometimes came at a high cost. And a high cost meant a high menu price. We used to get, consistently, the feedback in the first few years was that great food, great place, blah, 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 but burns a hole in the pocket, or breaks the bank, or whatever. It's expensive. And it was always a but, where it wasn't like a bad thing, but it was definitely something that people felt the pinch, right? It would have been an obvious thing for us to bring the menu pricing down just to get those people in and be like, no, we're not that expensive. We were like, no, this is, and like I said, we were not profitable for at least 3 years. So we were like, you want to eat good food, this is the price it comes at, right? So if you don't, then there's lots of other options. And
My last question was, how do you keep track of your competition, and how often does one sort of change your tactics to compete with them, or to sort of get on par with them, or anything of that sort?
So that's a very instinctive thing to do, is to keep looking over your shoulder as to who's doing what, and
Right.
and possibly modify your sort of trajectory based on that. Bad idea.
Nah.
You can never control how many people crop up around you. Today you could have one competitor, tomorrow you could have 10. You have no control over that, right? So stop focusing on the things that you have no control over and focus on your product. And that's the only thing you can actually control, right? Is what you do. And, your pricing, yes, you can look at competitor pricing, but again, it has to work for you, right?
Yes.
So if someone's selling a burger for half the price of mine, it doesn't mean I bring my pricing down to half. There's a reason why I might have to price it at what I'm putting it at. So I it's not to say I'm like oblivious to what's happening, but to some extent it is the case, because you have to, you can only control what's happening on your menu and, the experience that you're giving.
Right.
And I think more than on changing what you're doing, the thing to manage when competition grows around you is, again, people.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the easiest thing for you to possibly lose is your team members.
Right.
To the competition. But in terms of the concept, the food, the pricing, etc., I think that you have to you have to get it right for yourself, not benchmark it.
So my final question was actually something that has been bugging me for a while now. How do you deal with inflation? Because inflation would eat into your profit margin. That is the first thing that I thought of and funnily enough, the time I notice inflation is when the restaurant changes the menu pricing.
Yeah.
Like a repeated restaurant that I go to, it's like, suddenly expensive ho gaya. And I get it. Why? How does it affect you? When do you decide to sort of act on it?
So that's the thing. If you look at the last year alone, inflation has been through the roof.
Yes.
And it's been steadily increasing, right? It's not something that it's just happened once and then it's kind of plateaued. But you can't keep increasing your pricing,
right,
every month.
Yeah.
And it is a big challenge. When we opened the restaurant, the dollar was, I think, 39. And whatever, it's like double.
Good old days.
Good old days. Right? Yeah, I feel old now. Yeah. But we saw it go up to like 50 in a year, right? So what do you do? Like half the stuff we get is imported, like wines, spirits. They're all imported, and they don't care. It's all like marked to the dollar, and pricing is fluid in that sense. But you can't keep increasing your menu pricing. People genuinely, will not come. And so, of course, it's a thing of like seeing how long you can stretch it out to before you do have to do it. But it's a very big reality of our business that it's scary at times, right? Like
there is no way to predict also or project like anything, basically.
And it affects everything, right? Like petrol prices go up, it affects the cost of your vegetables because they have to be transported to you. Obviously, like your own gas prices go up, like everything, right, gets impacted by that. So it's a big problem, and that's when you really have to forget inflation, like COVID, right? Like that was like a big time when you had to figure out like if you have a buffer or you have the ability to continue or not. So
or shut it down, basically.
Yeah, because if it's not viable and your costing is just not working out, it's better to, and that's what we did, right, with the restaurant. So on ending on a happy note, talking about the restaurant that closed down because it didn't. But no, it's a reality, and it's better to kind of stop the bleed at the right time.
Will you start a restaurant now?
Maybe not, but I'll appreciate those who are running them much more.
No, I did get a lot of clarity from Gauri. I think I did. I mean, I genuinely had like a bunch of questions I had written down and now I've asked them. I think this could have been a longer conversation, but I know you have to go do your own podcast, which is called
This Round is on Me.
Yes. Please check out Gauri's podcast. It's really fun. Like she has big celebrities like Shweta Bachchan coming in. Like हमारे गरीब podcast पे कोई आता नहीं है. But no, but like please do check it out. I really like her podcast. It's like
I feel like you trashed my podcast. You trashed South Bombay. We collectively trashed Indians. This is like the worst.
When did I trash your podcast? I'm just telling you that you get fancy people and all. But anyway, no, I was going to say please listen to her podcast. It's a very intelligent podcast, I must say, and I really like listening to it because she's such a great presence in general. And I hope your restaurant journey continues.
Thank
and
you.
I hope we can do a part 2 of this because
Yeah.
finance
Yeah.
is such a big part which we missed
That
out.
one I'll show up for. That one I'll have something semi-intelligent to say.
I was like अभी थोड़ा basic कर लेते हैं, लोगों को पूछ लेते हैं कि dream beam है क्या तेरे पास, then we can go to the nitty-gritties later. We will do a part 2 later, I promise you. If you have been watching ELI 10, I know this has been a very different sort of episode for you. Just leave a comment or DM me or do whatever and tell us whether you like this episode, whether you want more of such episodes, because I have a line of hosts just sitting right there which I will just get right here and I will ask them questions like these.
I feel so special.
But thank you so much, Gauri.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abbas.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
My pleasure.
I will see you next week. Bye.
Bye bye.